According to Exodus chapter 17, the Israelite congregation pushed deeper into the wilderness of sin, eventually pitching their camp in Rephidim. But upon arriving at the encampment, they faced an immediate environmental reality. There was absolutely no water for the population to drink. Read carefully, this text provides a rigorous structural analysis of early Israelite leadership operating under extreme compounding pressure. Exodus 17 presents two distinct back-to-back crises. First, an internal systemic collapse driven by thirst, which is immediately followed by a lethal external military threat. Together, these events form the dual axis of divine providence. National survival requires resolving both internal resource failure and external kinetic violence. At the center of these trials is a single physical artifact, the rod of God. This staff acts as the focal point, mediating the divine response across both domains. These successive emergencies force Moses to deploy two entirely distinct models of leadership to keep the congregation alive. The transition between the two events is violently abrupt, slamming the narrative from a crisis of faith directly into a brutal crisis of physical survival. Ultimately, the encampment at Rephidim functions as a comprehensive stress test of the nascent nation's structural integrity and its reliance on divine mediation. The internal crisis begins almost immediately here. Exodus 17, verse 2 records the people actively confronting Moses, chiding him and demanding water. By verse 3, the situation devolves into a severe psychological breakdown. The Israelites murmur against Moses, questioning if he orchestrated their exodus from Egypt simply to execute them, their children, and their cattle with thirst. This represents a systemic internal collapse. The biological reality of dehydration threatens the complete dissolution of the community's trust in their leader. Moses reaches a state of extreme physical vulnerability. He cries out to God in verse 4, warning that the mob is nearing the point of stoning him to death. The divine operational mandate issued in verse 5 is highly specific. Moses must walk ahead of the people, take the elders of Israel as witnesses, and carry the exact rod he used to smite the river in Egypt. This instruction pivots the geographic focus to Horeb. The text features a divine promise to stand before Moses upon the unyielding rock of this mountain. The mandated action is direct. Moses must strike the stone before the elders to trigger the miracle. When the wooden staff strikes the rock, the intervention is executed. Water gushes forth, instantly resolving the biological dehydration and the escalating socio-political mutiny. However, the institutional memory of this near failure is codified in verse 7. Moses names the location Massah and Meribah because the Israelites chided him and tempted the Lord by asking if God was truly among them. This first sequence establishes a critical baseline. Internal material sustenance is the absolute, non-negotiable prerequisite before a nation can organize to face any external threat. With the water supply secured, the narrative pivots sharply. Verse 8 records the sudden arrival of Amalek, who engages Israel in battle at Rephidim. The contrast is stark. The Israelites survive an internal trial of faith over resources and are instantly thrust into an unprovoked war of existential annihilation. Moses immediately delegates the tactical response, ordering Joshua to select men and deploy for physical combat. This diagram shows Moses' strategic positioning on the high ground, holding the rod of God. A precise operational constraint emerges. When Moses holds his hand up, Israel prevails. When lowered, Amalek gains advantage. The army's survival is mathematically tied to the staff's elevation. The rod of God shifts in function. It transitions from an instrument of resource extraction to an active instrument of real-time military command. Down in the valley, this dynamic translates into an intense, chaotic physical reality, with momentum swinging back and forth based entirely on hilltop actions. Divine providence in warfare requires continuous, active human mediation to sustain momentum on the battlefield. Returning to the summit, we see the fatal flaw in this system. According to verse 12, Moses' hands become heavy with physical exhaustion. The entire divine mandate and the survival of the army below is bottlenecked by raw, failing human physiology. An immediate emergency structural intervention is required. They place a physical stone under Moses for him to sit on, stabilizing his core. Then, a lateral support system is deployed. Aaron and Hur position themselves on either side to bear the literal weight of his hands. This graphic maps the collaborative leadership structure at play. Singular vertical authority fails under sustained pressure until buttressed by lateral structural supports. This physical architecture ensures his hands remain steady until the going down of the sun. The tactical result of this sustained mediation is definitive. Verse 13 records that Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Supernatural victory cannot be maintained by isolated, singular authority. It demands a resilient, unified, and physically supportive human framework. In the aftermath of the battle, the immediate priority shifts to establishing a permanent historical record. This ancient papyrus text reflects the rigorous codification required. The Lord commands Moses to write this event down as a memorial. There is also a secondary oral command: rehearse this history in the ears of Joshua, the future military leader. Moses constructs a physical monument. Verse 15 notes he builds an altar named Jehovah Nissi, meaning the Lord is my banner. It connects the heavy stone to the temporary wooden rod. The passage closes with a chilling theological declaration in verse 16. The Lord has sworn to have war with Amalek from generation to generation. This command defines a state of perpetual conflict, framing the existential threat to Israel as a permanent historical reality that requires ongoing vigilance. The encampment at Rephidim forces the Israelites through two vital trials: the internal threat of thirst, resolved at the rock, and the external threat of war, resolved on the hill. Exodus 17 reveals divine providence as an active synergy between supernatural power and organized human collaboration,